Thank you all for coming. Welcome to Brown Bag Lit. We're really happy to see you here today, this Monday morning. My name's Chloe Elena Miller. Shasta Grant and I opened Brown Bag Lit's virtual doors in January 2023. And today we're really happy to welcome Nicole Haroutunian and Helen Georgas. And Nicole wrote this beautiful book, Choose This Now. So they'll be talking about it today. We really hope that you will join us here at Brown Bag Lit for a class or reading. And through May, we're offering monthly classes and weekly lunch break writing accountability membership meetings. Our next class is with Shasta Grant on May 23rd about finding connections in your writing. And our next and final event of the season is Writing Toward Complication, Tangled Relationships in Fiction and Nonfiction on Monday, June 3rd from 12 to 1 with Miriam Gershow and Stephanie Austin. And then we'll start up again in the fall for our next season. You can find all of our upcoming events on our website, brownbaglit.com, or following us on social media, which I'll put into the chat. So please make sure during our event today, you keep yourself muted, keep the chat open. We'll save some time at the end for a Q&A. And then you can also follow along with the links that we post and share anything that you like about the work that you're hearing. So we're really excited to present Nicole and Helen today. I'll put their bios into the chat. You might be interested to know that not only did Shasta and I meet together at Sarah Lawrence at their MFA program, but Nicole and Helen met each other there as well. And I just wanted to add that I really loved reading this book. I know that you guys will too. The focus is on mothers creating, what it means to be an artist, female friendship, and I was really moved by so many parts of the book. So I'm really excited to hear more about it. And I will turn it over to you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Shasta. Thank you, Brown Bag Lit, for hosting us today. And thanks to all of you who are joining us during this lunchtime conversation. I'm really happy, as is Nicole, to be here today to talk about Nicole's beautiful new book, Choose This Now, which is also a brilliantly crafted novel in stories, as Chloe said, about friendship, about art making, and about motherhood. It was published in March of this year, so it's brand new by Noemi Press. If you haven't had a chance to buy it and read it yet, please do. It's so, so good. So I'm happy to be here today to talk to Nicole about Choose This Now and talk to her about the form of novels in stories. Just a little bit about how the two of us, Nicole and I, came together for this conversation in particular today. Nicole and I have been longtime friends and I would say collaborators. We met in the MFA in Writing program at Sarah Lawrence College. We met in the fall of 2007. We were both in Victoria Riddell's writing workshop together. So that's when we started reading early drafts of early versions, I would say, of each other's work. And we've been sharing work and workshopping each other's work off and on ever since. And we've also been really good friends, not off and on ever since as well. Nicole and I also worked on a project called Underwater New York together, along with two other Sarah Lawrence College MFA writing alums, Nikki Pombier and Nicole Miller. Nicole, I think, is here today. Another Sarah Lawrence College shout out. And Underwater New York was a project, an online platform of creative work inspired by the waterways of New York City. And so we published about 2 issues a year of writing, visual art, and music. We hosted readings and events. We collaborated with a lot of different arts and literary organizations throughout the city. And so we worked closely on that project as co-editors from 2009 until about 2022. And for the last 2 years, Nicole and I have been weekly writing accountability partners. So once a week for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever our schedules allow, we check in with each other and talk to each other about what we've been able to work on in terms of our own writing that week. And so I'll say that my friendship with Nicole, along with my own writing and art making, these 2 things have been really closely intertwined or interconnected, much like a novel in stories. And I'm really appreciative and really value this intertwining and this interconnectedness. So that's how we came to be in conversation about the book and novels and stories today. Oh, I will also say that I'm at work on a novel and stories, which is another reason the theme of the event today is novels and stories, as well as Nicole's book. So Nicole is going to read an excerpt for us from Choose This Now. She and I will be in conversation about the book, talking about the book and about craft and about the form of novels and stories. And then we're going to open it up to questions from all of you, for Nicole or for us. Just before we do that, Nicole and I have a question for all of you, which is, what is your favorite novel and stories? So if you have one or you think of one during our conversation, please put the title into the chat because we want to know what it is. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Helen. Hi, everybody. Thank you to Chloe and Shasta and Brown Bag Lit and everybody here. I'm so glad that Helen threw in at the end that you are also working on a novel and stories, because I was ready to bust in there and say that if you didn't. So I am going to read about a 4-minute excerpt. It comes like a little more than halfway through the book. One nice thing about novels and stories is that because each chapter is a story unto itself and stands alone, I can kind of read from anywhere. And because we're talking about this literary friendship that we have, me and Helen, I wanted to focus on a part of the book where the two kind of key friends that make up the spine of the book are together. They're sort of apart for a lot of the book, I realized while I was looking for a section where they were together. So that is what helped me choose this part. It comes sort of halfway through a story called Saturday, New York City. And in this story, the two friends, it's 2010, they are following a movie star that they have spotted in Central Park. I think that's all you need to know. Now that we're on the street, other people begin to recognize the movie star. Heads turn. If it were another part of town, a part populated by actual New Yorkers, no one would approach her, but we're in tourist territory. The social mores are different. We hang back along the low stone fence that flanks the park while she engages in a group photo op. What's your prediction? I ask Val. Where's she going next? A magazine shoot? A dress fitting? The apartment of a very rich and handsome man? I shake my head. Can you imagine how much maintenance she's got to do? Maybe she's going for highlights or Botox. Val puts an index finger to the double lines between her eyebrows. I'd never noticed them before. Maybe she'll take us with her, she says. Us? Do I have those lines too? I reach up to check. Not yet. So far, it's just the ones beside my mouth. When the movie star pauses, we do too, leaning against the fence and watching her from half a block away. We can't take our eyes off of her. She's both reserved and somehow radiant as she greets her public. Gosh, she swarmed, I say. The movie star takes a step back to place her bag on the wall. When she turns to wrap her arms around some teenage girls, I can smell the jasmine scent of her hair as she tosses it over her shoulder. That's when I realize how much closer we've inched. The girls are shrieking as they attempt a selfie, leaning this way and that to try to fit everyone in the frame. I tilt my head, gesturing us along with my jaw. We need to give it up, I try to telegraph to Val. We're no better than these tourists and kids if we just sit here waiting to see where she's going next. I slide off the wall and continue down the street, walking with purpose past the movie star, pretending my hardest not only that we haven't been following her, but that I haven't noticed her at all. At the corner, I glance over at Val. It takes me a moment to make sense of what I'm seeing. Even when I think I know what I'm looking at, it defies understanding. Val's got the movie star's bag, the big purple elephant of it, clutched to her chest. Smell this leather, she says. I tear my eyes from Val and look back down the street. The movie star is still taking pictures. She doesn't know yet. If I grab it from Val, could I return it before the movie star notices? You won't believe this, I hear her say. It felt light when I picked it up, and it's because, look, it's empty. I lean over ever so slightly to confirm. The inside of the bag is silk, monogrammed, and yes, totally empty. Maybe she's on her way to pick something up. Maybe she just likes the way it completes her outfit. I hear rumblings behind us. I can't look back again, but my guess is that the theft. That's what this is, right? A theft has been noticed. I make eye contact with Val. Run, I say. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Nicole. I love a good theft
Yeah.
in a story. So that story is told from Telleen's point of view. And most of the book is about, most of the book is told from Val and Tal. So Val and Tal are, I would say, best friends or really close friends that we meet in the first chapter at a college party. And most of the book is told either from Val or Tal's first person point of view. So we alternate between their points of view. Without giving too much away, 3 of the stories in the book are also told from other characters, 3 other characters' points of view, which is really interesting. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about how you came to this particular structure where we move between Val and Tal, but then we also have 3 other characters that we get their points of view?
Yeah. So I came to this structure like pretty painfully over a long period of time, like years. It didn't necessarily start out this way, but it really evolved through revision. I started out, I think, with one story that took place in thirds, 1999, 2004, and then like about 10 years later. And that one had this like kind of core friendship in it. And as I wrote other stories, some of them maybe were from the point of view of that first person who had been in those 3 different time periods. And some of them in my head at first weren't connected. But then, sort of over time, I was like, well, the friend in that first story I wrote is an art major. And then this person that I've written this story about is an artist. And this person that I've written this other story about used to be an artist, but she gave it up and now she works in museums. And I was like, are those the same person? And it took like a very long time to be like, yeah, those are the same person. I've just given them different names. And maybe the particulars of their stories are a little bit different, but I can sort of unify that world. And then I wound up breaking up that first story that took place in those thirds into 3 different stories and kind of fleshing those out more. So all of a sudden I had like multiple stories from that first person's point of view. So I kind of had that alternating. And then I had these other stories that didn't totally fit. They couldn't really be either of those 2 people, but they were sort of in that world. And so I did a lot of surgery, like maybe in some of them I lifted out that character and put in one of these characters and then had to kind of totally change that story, but keep some of the conceits of it. Like the excerpt that I just read, it used to be about the opposite friends. I kind of swapped them, and then their motivations were totally different. Like why that first person had stolen the bag is very different than why this other person stole the bag. So there were just like so many things. At one point, that story was in third person. So it was like 3 years of revision to wind up in this sort of unified world. And those 3 kind of outlier stories are there for pretty specific reasons to shed light on these first person characters, kind of let us know the ways that maybe they're not totally revealing themselves in their first person narratives, or give a little bit of context and perspective or background to the things that they're not telling us. Long answer.
No, it's a great answer. And it really shows us or shows me like how important, we all know this probably as writers, like revision is, and how I'm intrigued by your use of the word surgery, because I'm also in awe of that too, the way that we have a lot of, or you did a lot of crafting and sort of mechanical work. I mean, it's also a beautiful creative work, but just that there is work and kind of analysis and decision making that has to happen in revision. And I really liked your use of the word surgery in terms of like crafting, like literally like crafting things together. Do you want to talk a little bit about your editorial process with Noemi in terms of what they thought of the form, or how they may or may not have helped you come to this particular structure?
Yeah, so those years of revision kind of took some of the shape they took because of my editor at Noemi, John Darcy. So when Noemi acquired the book, it was linked, but it wasn't necessarily a novel, and some of the stories were like pretty disparate, and they were okay with that. But then in my first meeting with John, he was like, I think it either needs to come more together or become more separate. And I think either way could work. Why don't you take some time, reread it, and think about what's going to be right for you? And he gave me a little reading list to sort of inform my thinking about this. And then I read what he suggested. I thought about the book, and I came back to him and I was like, I think maybe it needs to come together more. And he was like, that's right, it does. Um, and maybe he would have said that if I decided the other way too, but I don't think so. And I think he was right, or we were right. Um, and he had a pretty light touch. So he didn't tell me how to do it. He didn't tell me what needed to happen. He was just like, okay, now next time, like send me a draft that's more of a novel and stories. So that I sort of like came to on my own. But a nice thing about Noemi is they're known as a poetry press more so than prose. And a lot of the prose that they published is experimental. I don't think that my book is necessarily experimental, but they're like really fine with things being in between or kind of not definable. Um, so they were always like really supportive about the kind of in-betweenness of novels and stories.
Speaking of the in-betweenness, during our weekly writing check-ins, we talk a lot about form, novels and stories, and other forms of work, of fiction. Is form something that matters to you as a reader or as a writer, or do you think that form is really something that's more important to the gatekeepers in the literary world, agents and publishers and editors?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I do think it's really important, and it's something I love to think about and kind of wrestle with, but I don't necessarily think the labels are important. I think that the form that a project takes, you know, can be maybe needs to be inspired by the content, can sort of create the right container for the story that you're telling, or can help a reader experience it in a certain way. But um, I don't necessarily think that what you call it needs to define it or needs to be something marketable, although kind of doesn't hurt because a lot of people when they hear novels and stories are like, I don't know what that is. I don't think so. I don't know where to put that on the shelf. But then conversely, because I love novels and stories, if I see a section on a website that says like novels and stories, like I want to check out all those books, and I'm excited to read through the chat to see what everybody else is recommending. So labels in that way to help you find what you want to read can be useful. But I guess when you like name something, it does both things. It helps you find it, and then it helps other people say like, no, not that. What do you think about that?
I also love novels and stories. So this maybe leads into one of the next questions that I had for you, for us, is you mentioned that you love novels and stories, and you mentioned a reading list that your editor had given to you. What are some of those titles? What are your favorite novels and stories? I love novels and stories, but form doesn't really matter to me. I have learned in starting to send out my manuscript that it does matter to the gatekeepers, agents, publishers, editors. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting for you and your experience in working with a small press is that they didn't care. There was no desire to define it. Defining the form didn't matter. I agree. As a reader, as a writer, so I'm in agreement, but I also want to hear, like, since you mentioned that you love novels and stories, what some of those titles might be.
Yeah, I'm not gonna mention the ones that he gave me because I didn't like them. So I got it. I got what he was pointing out. But I don't want to like trash talk anybody on a recording. But those I was like, oh. And then just as a side note, I was also like, I can't believe because he's the one who picked my book. When I submitted to a contest, the Noemi Prose contest, and I didn't win, but they wanted to publish the book, and he's the one who wanted it. And I read these other books that he liked, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is nothing like what I write. Um, so yeah, readers can come in surprising forms. So what I do love is one I read very recently that's about to come out that hopefully is on your radar already. And if it's not, put it on your list. It's Craft Stories I Wrote for the Devil by Ananda Lima, which is absolutely wild. And that one is experimental in a way that mine and Helen's are not. I mean, the devil's in it. There's lots of sort of magical realism and just very surprising things happening, but also like so beautiful and moving and surprising. So Ananda is definitely one to watch out for. Um, I also love A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan, and that is a book that I think has something to say about marketing novels and stories because it's not, I think, marketed as a novel and stories, but it is. Each chapter can be taken separately, and then together they build into this book. And also the sequel, The Candy House, does the same thing. And then I think we both have like a shared love of Alice Munro. Do you want to shout out some of the Alice Munro titles?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of early Alice Munro. So one of the models for my own book is Lives of Girls and Women, which is talked about as the only novel written by Alice Munro, but it's really a novel in stories. Um, Another favorite of mine is on Alice Munro, what I would call a novel in stories called Who Do You Think You Are, which is called The Beggar Maid in the States, which makes no sense as a title. It is talked about as a linked collection, but it's really a novel in stories. I mean, I love stories about girlhood. I love coming of age books. I know that we share a love of Miriam Taves and stories about girls and girlhood and young women. So early Alice Munro are two of my favorite novels and stories. And in thinking about this recently, I realized that the first novel and stories I probably ever read was a book called A Bird in the House by another Canadian novelist, well-known, kind of canonical Canadian novelist, writer, Margaret Lawrence. And that was a linked, I think it's talked about as a linked story collection, but it focuses on this young girl in a small fictional town in Manitoba called Manawaska. And we read that in high school, and it's actually a book that's referenced in my own manuscript. So that's I realized recently that that's probably the first novel and stories that I ever read. I also love Gino Diaz's Drown, that I would call a novel and stories, even though it's talked about as a linked collection, and Sweet Talk by Stephanie Vaughn, which is also a linked collection, but to me feels like a novel in stories. It has all the stories are around the same family, and it has the kind of emotional arc or sort of emotional movement, a kind of weight or heft that to me feels emotionally like a novel. Those are some of my favorites.
I think whoever recommended me Sweet Talk is here. It was either Nicole or Lauren. And that book, it's really It's really so good if you haven't read it. Lives of Girls and Women made such an impression on me. I wish that I had grabbed it before, because if I tried to stand on my bed to get it, I think I would topple my whole system. But I like embroidered a cover for it, just to like sit there thinking about it with little stitches, and like I rebound my copy and little embroidered cover of my own. Um, so yeah, reading novels and stories, I think has really helped think about how to structure this one. And I think it kind of does, well, obviously it gives you a part of the benefit of a novel where you get the sort of sweep and like a bigger arc. But then I do think I'm a short story writer. If I didn't have the sort of system of like taking it in these smaller bites, I don't think I could get to that arc on my own. Um, so I do love the sort of shape of a novel and stories where I still get to be my story writer self, but then, follow characters over 20 years or come at them from different directions.
So I read something online recently, a kind of like, I thought it was sort of interesting, a kind of how to write a novel and stories that I was like, oh, let me read this and see what it says about how I should be writing my book. And this particular guide, I'll say, talked a lot about the importance of transitions between stories or chapters in a novel, in stories. And as I was reading that, I thought, oh my God, I've never even thought about transitions between sort of discrete stories in a linked collection or in a novel and stories. Is that something, are transitions something that you've ever thought about or think about?
No, I think so. I feel like that person is wrong. If you want to put transitions in, I'm sure there's a great way to do that. But I feel like one of the, what's there to recommend writing a novel and stories is you don't have to do the transitions, because then one story ends and another one starts. And that's what makes them like different stories, is you can leave space in between. And in my book, I leave space in between. There's years in between sometimes. And, these people are living their lives. There's a lot that I don't show you. And I don't tell you necessarily that I'm not showing you that, or let you know what's going to happen in the meantime. There's no transition like that. It just, a story ends with a character, in one case, like having recently broken up with her partner and had an abortion, and sort of wandering a street in New Jersey in a costume, like, lost and bereft. And then the next time you see her, she's like living in Queens with a toddler and a partner and a different job. And, you have to fill in what happened. As a reader, you have to do the work, I think, to figure out where the story goes in those breaks, because the transitions aren't there. And as a reader, I like doing that. I like sort of being involved in the creation of the narrative and filling in those blanks. Not that, like, if you're writing a novel and stories and you have transitions in there, that's wonderful. That just sounds like a novel to me, not a novel and stories.
It sounds like a novel to me as well. I mean, my own book is composed so intentionally, and each story or chapter is so discrete, and each one is set in a very different place or setting. It was really kind of place or setting that was the impetus behind the structure. I never thought about transitions being important as a novel in stories or as a linked collection even. So I was curious what you had to say. You recently had an agent ask you if novels and stories were quote unquote your thing. How did you respond to that?
Um, I had a lot of things like going through my head, because I remain wanting to work with her. And I could tell she wasn't asking me that because she was excited about it. She wasn't like, this is great. Is this your thing? Because I can't wait to work with you. Um, but I was honest and I said, yes, this is my thing. Because the next book that I'm working on, the next manuscript, is a novel and stories. And I imagine that this is how I work. it could change in the future, but at least for now, if she were going to represent me, she would be representing somebody who writes novels and stories. And something I try to remember in the context of like the agent dynamic is, um, somebody made the point that like an agent works for you, not vice versa. And when you're a writer trying to get an agent, it really feels the opposite. It feels like you're really trying to make this person like you and make this person want to work with you. Um, but I think if I told her what she wanted to hear and she wanted to work with me and then I gave her my manuscript, she'd be like, change this, or no, thank you. Um, and if I have an agent again, I want them to be on board with the way that I actually want to write and do write. Um, so yeah, I think it was the first time that I was like, I write novels and stories. This is my thing. But I do think it's my thing. So yeah. What about you?
Like, will I continue writing novels and stories?
Yeah, like I know
Well,
you have another novel idea in mind for next when you're done
I
with
have
this
a
one.
novel idea in mind, yes. I don't think of myself as a novel and stories writer. Um, as I just said, I really conceived of my manuscript originally as a linked story collection. And over time, in the same way, maybe not exactly the same way, but over time, the collection has evolved into what I would call a novel in stories. There are 8 stories. 5 of them are told from a younger sister's point of view. And then each of the other family members get a story or chapter. So that was very intentionally crafted or composed in that way. As I mentioned, each of the stories has a distinct sort of place or setting. My writing is very place-based, but I conceived of it as a linked story collection. I will say that back when we were at Sarah Lawrence, I felt like every single writer out there, their first published book was a story collection. So this was a common enough thing, like not that long ago. I feel as though the publishing world has changed in many ways very quickly. And so I feel as though now it's more important for someone's debut work to be a novel rather than a linked story collection or even a novel in story. Some of the comments that I've gotten from the few agents that I've sent my manuscript to, they've all kind of like, loved the writing and the characters and the setting, but they get hung up on the structure. But it is what it is. However, my next book is a novel. I don't know that I'm a novelist in stories, and I have, like I said, that linked collection has evolved into a novel in stories. I don't know that it's my thing.
Yeah, that for some reason that's like comforting for me to hear. I don't know. That like, oh, other people think in different ways, so it's okay for me to think in this one way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I have a couple more questions and then we can open it up to all of you. So your book, I was curious, we haven't talked about this before, and this is a little off script in terms of like what we talked about,
All
and
up.
what we wanted to talk about, but like some of the stories have, or chapters have titles. Some of them are just a year, not just, but are a year. And so I hadn't noted that distinction when I read it the first or second time. This was something that I noted in looking at it more recently in preparation for our conversation today. And I was curious about how you came to title some of the stories, and then some of them are the name of the character and the year that the story takes place. Did you
Yeah,
think?
so it's slightly different than that. Some of them don't have like, some of them are titled with numbers, which are ages. Um, and then they all have the name of the character and the year. So, oh my goodness. Um, One of the characters, Valerie, her birthday is on Halloween, and there are multiple stories that take place on Halloween / her birthday, on or around. So those ones, I think they all originally had titles, like word titles, but I would then try to like embed in the story like what the year was and how old she was turning. And it was just like kind of awkward. But it was important to know. So I was like, I'm just gonna put it on the top. Like instead of trying to like make somebody be like, how do you feel now that you're 32? Although that does happen a little bit, honestly. I was like, I'm just gonna put at the top that she's 21 here, 26 here, 32 here, and 35 here. That was just more important to me than like having the title. It said more, and that's what titles need to do. They need to like do something for the story and do something for the reader. So those are the ones that just have like a number on the top. And then each story, no matter if they're titled like that or with a title, has who the narrator is and the year. They needed the narrator, I think, because of those like 3 outlier stories, but also because the 2 like main friends who have all the first person stories, their voices are very similar because I don't have a lot of range, I think, as a writer in that respect. So I kind of think if you didn't have that, you wouldn't know for a while until you sort of got what was happening, how they were different. And that was like, and maybe remains one of my insecurities with the book, that I just feel like I can't write different voices. But I tried to make that part of it. You know, there's a bunch of times where they kind of say that they're like Valental, like they're one person. So I was like, okay, it's fine. They sound the same, but you do need to know as a reader who is who. And then it starts in 1999 and ends in 2018. And like I was saying before, there sometimes are like a couple of years in between when one story ends and the next one starts. And it was like, why not just tell people that time has passed, and then they're going to be ready for like all of a sudden this person has a different job, lives in a different place, has a different family structure than they did when we last saw them 3 years ago. So it was all just sort of like, it didn't start that way. It didn't start with those kinds of titles and information at the top, but I was just like, why would I not just put it there?
I love it. I think it's so like seemingly simple, but very forthright. And it's a way in which you are able to like move us sort of through 20 years of friendship in Valental's life. And I will disagree in terms of your range as a writer. And it works in this case because Valental, like it's Valental. So they're often kind of confused for each other. They're so close in terms of their friendship and easily confused by other people. So I feel like the closeness in their voices feels important to this book.
Yeah, I mean, I will say just craft wise, like part of that, it's like it happened in the opposite direction that you might think. Like I didn't make their voices close because they have this close friendship, but I was like, I write in this one way and I can't really make it different. So how can a story like work with that? How can that be part of it? How can I make that work for me and work for the book? Just a little secret to share.
Yeah, how can we make our fiction speak to our strengths?
Exactly.
So at this point, I don't know, we can open it up. I'm also curious, I haven't been paying attention to the chat about whether people have put in titles of novels and stories. So I'm going to take a look at that. But we're happy, I think, to open it up to questions from everyone.
Sure, I will moderate the questions. We had a couple of questions that were asked and answered organically during your conversation, but we have a new question here from Lisa. Can Nicole talk a little more about how she unified worlds from the different stories she started with?
I used Halloween for part of that. So because I started, I think I mentioned that I started that story like 99, 2004, and then 10 years-ish later. But maybe I didn't mention here that those were all Halloweens. So I had that, and then I added some more Halloween in. And then I gave the other character a costume party, which was not a Halloween party, but a time that she wound up in costume. And through like adding in even more Halloween when I started to unify it and more costumes, I also, and my editor helped me with this too, by suggesting that I be a little bit more explicit about this. I had each character sort of give a little speech about her relationship to masks and costumes near the end of the book. And I went back through and made sure that like that little speech was substantiated throughout. So they each kind of had these different ideas about what masks and costume parties meant to them. And kind of meant to them sometimes in relation to each other or their other relationships. So that was something I had started with, but I really used it as a way to like create through lines. I also, this is like a lot more subtle and maybe was just helpful for me and is not as noticeable to a reader, but maybe it is. I did something kind of similar with fire, where each character has like some fire imagery or something to do with fire, or like mentions burning things or setting things on fire, or does burn things and set things on fire. But they each kind of do it in different ways. And I went through and kind of made that a thing for each of them, like really wrote out like specifically in notes just for myself. Like, this is how Valerie relates to fire. This is how Talene relates to fire in practice and metaphorically. And that's something that came like later in the process, and it was there, but I like made it sort of more concrete and more of like a thing. So in addition to like the bigger things like making two characters one character, like those were ways that I kind of like pulled it all into the same world enough that I started to be able to think of it as a novel.
Thank you for that. Can you talk to us about the cover? I just am so in love with this cover, and I would love to know, is there a story behind it? What was the process of cover design? Were you involved in it, or was it just presented to you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had a feeling that my voice was going to do this because I've been talking so much today. So working with Noemi, which is so small, like 3 people. One of the things that's awesome about that is I did have a lot of input into so many things, and they asked if I had an idea for the cover, and I did. So the artist for this artwork, which is called Pink Hair, her name is Caroline McAuliffe, and she's somebody I've known for years. So as I was writing this book, when I would go on Instagram or, see her work on the internet, I always, paid attention because I love her and her work. We've collaborated on various things. And this project that Pink Hair came from, it's a series called Invisible Mother, although it's in Icelandic when she writes it, so she pronounces it differently, but that's the translation. The reference is Victorian hidden mothers, where the mother would go under a carpet or a black blanket or a sheet to prop up their baby to hold them still for the long exposure of 19th century cameras. And if you're not familiar with this, you probably are, but if you're not, give it a Google, because the images are wild, because you can see the mother. She's just under a black sheet, which wasn't meant to be a metaphor, but is definitely a metaphor. So I used it like in a conversation, or sort of recounted conversation in the book, this idea of like a Victorian hidden mothers. And so her project, stuck with me. And I also thought she did it better than I did, her reference, because so the mother here, she's so conspicuous. Like, you can't see her face, you can't see her particulars, but your eye is really drawn to her because she has these very vibrant cloths draped over her. And each of the cloths that Caroline used has like a personal meaning to her. So there's a lot of stories embedded in them. I am a museum educator at, among other places, the American Folk Art Museum. So I spend my days like talking about the meaning embedded in textiles. So it really appealed to me for that reason too. So I actually changed the way that I referenced this phenomenon in the book because of this photograph. I was like, I can do it better. Caroline does it better. I need to be more rigorous about the way I'm thinking about this. So when Noemi asked me if I had an idea, I was like, well, I'm going to ask Caroline for this. And I didn't think she was going to let me because her little baby is right there. And I thought if somebody wanted to use a picture of my baby on their book cover, I would say no. But she like immediately said yes. I wrote like a very long email asking her and offering to send her the book and like attaching the story and the reference. And she was like, yeah, I talked about it with my wife. We're fine with it. We'd be honored. Great, do it. And I was like, are you sure? Like, can you read it first? What if you read it first and then you make sure you're comfortable? And she's like, I don't need to do that. I trust you. And later we were talking about it and she was surprised that I thought she was going to say no. She was like, I'm an artist. Like, I want people to see this work and more people are going to see it if you put it on your book. So that's true. We were just talking today about trying to do like a conversation together. So yeah, it's really great. And I love the book has so much art in it that I wanted to make sure that I used like a living artist's work on the cover too.
That is such a fascinating story. Thank you. Chloe has a question. She is very curious about how your friendship, writing friendship influenced each other's work. So this is for the both of you.
Helen, you want to start?
Well, I write about my novel in stories is about two daughters, Greek daughters growing up in a small town in Ontario, in their family's restaurant. Their family owns a restaurant. So they're sisters rather than friends, technically, but it's a kind of friendship, kind of forced friendship. So I'm really interested in the dynamic between girls and young women. And it's one of the things that I love about Nicole's book and Nicole's stories. They feature young girls, young women prominently as like the main characters or protagonists or narrators. And yeah, I love the way that Valental in this particular book and Choose This Now, their friendship kind of plays out over time. Like nothing, I was going to say like Nicole and I have talked a lot about plot and sort of an emphasis on character over plot and, character being plot. But what I love about Nicole's friendships between young women and girls is the way that kind of time and these tiny shifts in dynamics change over time. Like with Valental, one of them has a baby much sooner than another in the book, without giving too much away in terms of the plot. But the ways in which like friendships kind of shift or change over time, depending on how where women are in their lives, like whether they're married or whether they're in relationships or what kind of job they have, the way that Nicole kind of illustrates for us and makes us feel these like little shifts or big shifts in friendship that happen just over the course of a life via like a change in jobs or graduating from college or having a baby versus not having a baby, or one of them making art or not making art. So I'm just interested in the kind of dynamic between girls and women. And that's something that I have looked to as a kind of model in Nicole's work.
That's nice, Helen. I'm gonna take it in like a slightly different direction, the answer. So I think looking at the folks I know here, so many of you are writers, and I talk to all of you a lot, I think, about writing. but in our everyday lives, like Helen and I have jobs that are not writing jobs. Um, and it's been really important to like every week have on the calendar like 30 to 60 minutes where I'm going to talk about writing. And I put it in my calendar under my like work color, not my social color when I color code it. So it's like a work meeting that I have every week with somebody who cares about all of the same stuff I care about and who, like Helen, understands like the minutia of like when I was doing these, surgical, like lifting one character up and putting another one in. There's so few people that aren't going to be bored by that. And like, here you are. Like, I hope you just heard me talk about it a lot. But Helen, like, hears me talk about that stuff constantly every week. So that's been like so important. And also because I love her writing and I think we write kind of similarly, it does help with my confidence to read her work and be like, oh, I love Helen's work. And I see that what we're writing is similar. So maybe other people will also like what I'm doing if I feel so strongly about what she's doing and it's so similar. And then because agents and, right, our stories get rejected for the same reasons. So it's nice to like be able to like commiserate every week when that happens. So yeah, I would recommend finding somebody who writes like really similarly to you, who wants to talk to you a lot about it. It's very helpful.
I'm curious about these weekly meetings that you have. Are they on the phone? Are they Zoom, in person? Are you exchanging pages and talking about the pages in addition to keeping each other kind of accountable? Like more, can you tell us more like, I guess, like the logistical end of it?
Yeah, they're on Zoom and we do sometimes exchange pages, but like that's almost separate, right?
Yeah. I feel
Yeah.
like we do that kind of like off Zoom. It's not what we talk about. It's not really, we don't workshop each other's work as part of that check-in conversation, but that happens kind of off Zoom. Sorry, Nicole.
Yeah, no, it's the same. It's like, yeah, it's more like a work check-in. But yeah, it's not about like workshopping. Although like when I panic, because throughout the entire editorial process, my editor was like the only person who read any of these huge changes I was making. And then I was about to turn it in and I was like, what if John and I have no idea what we're doing? So I emergency sent it to Helen and another friend, Julia, and they read it in like 2 days and we're like, no, it's okay. Go ahead. So we do exchange work, but it's just separate.
We literally schedule a Zoom, like every week at the end of each meeting, we schedule next week's check-in, obviously at a time that works for both of us, like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, as Nicole said. I keep a schedule, like print out blank schedules every week. It's like bad for the environment, bad for trees, but I do it as a kind of visual sort of evidence of what I have done that week. So I print out a schedule and I literally, for every hour of every day, if I've worked on my own writing, it has to be my own writing. I put in, like, if it's like, from 12 to 1 over lunch, for example, I will put that on the schedule. It's more of a document of having worked rather than an expectation kind of schedule. So I will have that with me when I'm meeting with Nicole so that I can look back at my week and know, oh, for this hour on Tuesday, I worked on my own writing. I worked on revising this story. I worked on submitting to a particular, I don't know, residency, for example. And they have been so important to me because if I look at that schedule and I don't see anything on it, and I know that I'm meeting Nicole at 9 a.m. the next morning, I'm going to get some writing done because I don't want to like show up to our check-in meetings online and say to her, I've done nothing this week. So it's really like a way, obviously that's what accountability means, for me to hold myself accountable, but through her, it helps to have someone else listening to you tell them what you did or did not do that week.
Yeah, same.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question here. Can you say more about how you deal with rejection, both of you? I feel like this is something we all struggle with. I have felt very at peace since I stopped submitting stories a while back, but soon I'll have to get back out there, and I'm filled with dread if I think about it, which is why I don't. Ugh, I feel that so much.
Hi, Lauren. Lauren and I also used to email back and forth just numbers, like how many words we wrote. And that was also good inspiration, like in a generative phase, because like I would want to, do as well as or better than Lauren, not because we're competing in terms of publishing, but if I was like, oh my gosh, Lauren has like this busy job and she's written, 4,000 words, and I have done nothing this week except write 300 words, like I need to. So that's another like accountability model that's helpful. I like just ignore the emails. I just make sure that I have like other things lined up and something else I'm excited about. And there's so much rejection also in publishing a book, which is a bummer and something I'd not thought about. But like so much rejection. Like I sent this to all kinds of people who could have written reviews about it or written things about it, and like almost nobody did. Like that's a bummer. Try to like schedule an event somewhere and they're like, you're not famous enough. That sucks. So there's just like, yeah, just so much constant rejection that I feel like just have to be ready with the next thing and then just ignore it. Like I just delete the email like really quick. Like make a note where I need to make a note and then just pretend it didn't happen. I don't know if that's like like psychologically healthy, but on to the next. You can do it.
I'm on pause right now in terms of getting individual stories from my novel and stories out. And that has been helpful to me. In the same way, it sounds like Lauren is on pause. It has given me some peace, and I'm focusing on the manuscript as a whole. So I want to feel like I have come to a place of satisfaction with the manuscript as a whole. And I'm sort of focusing on sending out the whole manuscript versus individual stories. So for now, I've just kind of taken a pause, which also means a pause on rejection. It's really hard. I don't know that I have any sound words of advice other than like, there's something in me that keeps compelling me to write despite the rejection. And so that's what I kind of go with.
I love that. That's why we write. There's something in us that needs to come out, and we need to keep writing our own stories. Thank you both so much for sharing, Nicole and Helen. I hope everyone has already read Choose This Now. If not, I put the link to Nicole's website into the chat, as well as the link to Brown Bag Lit. And I've also shared and will email out, because I think it's a great list of novels and stories, to everyone who has participated. Thank you so much for coming.